afternoon, everybody. Share my screen here. All right. So here we go. So you should all see my presentation now, hopefully. So today you're joining us to talk about getting outside and getting students engaged, doing some environmental science work without leaving your campus. So just a little background about me. My name is Colleen McDaniel. I've been at Vernier now for 9 years. It's just hard to believe. I am considered a biology and environmental science educational technology specialist. So if you ever have questions about biology or environmental science or problems with sensors, there's a really good chance you've talked to me at some point. Just some background, I went to Truman State University where I got my bachelor's of science in biology, and then eventually got my master's in science education from Montana State University. Between bachelor's and master's, I actually worked on a PhD for a little while. And while I was doing my PhD, I learned, I really enjoyed talking to people about science overall, instead of researching just one little microcosm. So I actually got a federal grant to become a teacher. And so I left research and taught for 6 years in Houston, Texas, where I taught pre-AP and grade level biology to 9th graders, and then was lucky enough to teach AP environmental science, which I taught for about 5 years and actually was an AP grader during that time as well, which was actually a lot of fun. So today, let's talk about why we want to go outside. So there's been a lot of research taking place about looking at getting students engaged in learning and what taking them out of the classroom can actually do for them. Research has indicated that learning outdoors can actually increase performance. It actually increases students' performance on tests, standardized testing. It increases their engagement in actual subject area that you're teaching. One of the big things that it helps reduce stress, just getting them out of that centralized typical classroom kind of gets them in a different mindset and helps relax them and open up more learning. One of the other things is it gives the students kind of that sense of place, that sense of ownership of knowing the actual area that they're in and what's happening around them, which is actually a really important part of just, students becoming adults and being able to make decisions about things around them. The other thing is it's more fun, not just for the students, but for you as teachers too. It's great to get outside of the classroom, get a little bit of a different atmosphere, kind of see how students interact with each other in kind of a different location. And one of the things that I love about this is that this is something that can benefit all ages. I mean, we're talking anywhere from grade school kids all the way up through college. So it's something that can really benefit any level of student. And I take this a lot from a personal experience with this, because when I taught high school in Houston, I was smack dab in the middle of a kind of more urban suburban region. And the money just wasn't there to be able to go on field trips. And so I had to figure out, what do I have around me that I can get students interested in environmental science and help them have that learning aspect. And I just thought, we can stay on campus and just walk around campus and see what there is for us to look at and study. So that's the big thing about getting started with this, is just getting them outside to begin with. It doesn't have to be data research to start with. One of the things I would do with my students is, after we had a really stressful exam or I knew they had a big project that was due, the very next day, they're just going to be brain dead. So I would encourage them, like, hey, you know what? Let's just go outside for a walk around campus. And while we're doing this, let's just pick up some trash and help increase, how our campus looks and make it look nicer. And I was amazed at how excited my students were and how engaged they were actually in that process. And they started asking if we could go outside more often. And sometimes we'd go outside to do some just typical lectures or just kind of experiencing the environment. And there were times that I would say, hey, everybody, we're going to go on a field trip. And we would just go to this one part on campus and look around, look at what plants were growing in that area, look at the temperature, kind of just different aspects around, and start making observations. And so once you kind of get them used to getting outside, it helps them kind of be able to look around more of what are they exactly noticing, and trying to kind of pull those ideas out of them of, well, what did you notice when we went on that walk? What are you wondering about what we see around campus? And then you can easily jump from there and start turning into kind of a little research project, or take some lessons that you might typically do in a lab setting and see what you can do out in the field instead. And the thing I found is you can do this really well with different levels of scaffolding. You can do everything from a really structured process of, we are going to do X experiment, this is how we're going to do it, to let them decide, encourage them in different directions of things that are actually testable. Like, for example, some students might wonder, well, what is the temperature up at the top of a tree? Not exactly testable, but say, we can't really get up there to test, but we can maybe look down at the ground around the tree and look at temperature variations there. So the idea is you kind of want to gradually introduce them to this, and then kind of get them, encourage them to start questioning and asking about things around them and what they could study. So I talk about some model labs. So there's a few labs in some of our books that I like to think of as kind of like a model of things that can be done outside. One of the things is from our middle school science with Vernier, which, even though it's a middle school lab, it's an activity that I think can go for all grade levels, because you're basically looking at temperature and light at different distances from the ground in different locations. So that's something that you can talk about with middle schoolers. You can talk about it with high schoolers. You can even take it to the college level. And it's just a matter of talking about terms of little microclimates, or, what is happening? Why are having them investigate, why is the temperature different at different locations? What happens with light? Things like that. In the earth science, we have this activity looking at reflection and absorption of light, which is typically done in a lab setting, where you have a lamp shining on a piece of paper with a temperature probe and a light sensor measuring the change in temperature, and then also the reflection of light taking place. Well, that's great when you can do it in a lab, but why not do it outside too, where we could take a temperature probe, put it on a concrete surface, see what the temperature is reading. We could use a light sensor to still measure the reflection of sunlight off that concrete surface, and then compare it to, say, a grass area or an area under a tree, or if you have a football field, look at the difference between, if there's artificial turf, compare that to the grass that might be in a different location. So it's kind of taking some of these labs that you could see that are structured for a laboratory setting and looking at how can you take that and go outside and make it kind of the same general concept, basically. And then the other activity is one that was more recent from our climate meteorology experiments book I wrote. That is, it's considered what I call the culminating project of this lab book, where it's actually having students kind of studying urban heat islands or microclimates and giving them the option to how they're going to set up their own study. So I would say the schoolyard study is going to be your very cookbook, standardized, get you going. The reflection absorption of light is going to be a laboratory-based one that you can try, that you can modify to go outside. And then the climate meteorology one, studying microclimates, is going to be really open-ended, allowing the students to kind of explore things on their own. And on the other hand, you don't have to have a set lab to be able to start with this. You can go out and test anything, and the students can drive those questions. So what I think of is, what sensors do you have available to you? And the thing that I would do is be like, okay, students, we've been outside, we've wondered, here's the equipment we have. With this equipment, what do you want to study and how do you want to study it? So by having things available to them, they can then start investigating and thinking about different areas they want to test. And again, this is going to be based on grade level and kind of education level for the students. So, you know, you might have a really, for example, an on-level course that you might have, the students might not do well at not having those boundaries. So you can kind of guide them, okay, we're going to specifically look at soil temperature at different locations on campus. While your more advanced students, they're going to be able to have that kind of more open-ended and be able to understand things that are testable or not. But the same hand, they still might go off the rails. So you want to make sure that you're encouraging the students to kind of do these investigations and explore, but at the same time, you want to make sure that they are doing testable questions, things that they can actually get some data and results out of. So some of the sensors that I just sat down and thought, what could I use with my students here, is really basic stuff. A temperature probe can do wonders. And there's two basic different kinds of temperature probes I have up here. Is we have a stainless steel temperature probe and a surface temperature probe. I also have an example of the LabQuest sensor, which is this one over here with the temperature probe, and then a Go Direct sensor. And you can use either of these. The stainless steel is great for soil because it can actually penetrate the ground a lot easier, while the surface temp is great for air temperature. It's also great for measuring temperature on objects, like on a rock, on a tree, on leaves, if they're interested on looking at what different leaves have temperatures. Because this has an exposed thermistor, it's going to respond a lot faster than a regular stainless steel temperature probe, because it's basically, this is the guts of what's inside the stainless steel, but we added the stainless steel sheath on there to add protection and a little bit more robustness. This, because it doesn't have it, is going to respond a lot faster, and it can be used in all of the same circumstances outside as you would a stainless steel one as well. Other things that are great to look at is kind of your basic weather parameters. So looking at humidity, pressure, light, UV radiation. In some of our Go Direct sensors, which is really great, is that we've been able to do some multi-sensors. So instead of having to have 3 LabQuest sensors that would measure humidity, light, and pressure, or humidity, temperature, and pressure, you can get just one Go Direct weather sensor that can actually measure all 3 of those at the same time, which is very useful. Same thing with light and UV. If you're using LabQuest sensors, you need a light sensor, a UVA, and a UVB. While with the Go Direct light and color, you can use both. They have visible light and UV sensor on there as well. The other things, looking at carbon dioxide. So there's a lot of students that are really interested in the pollution around campus. So setting up different times a day that they measure the amount of CO2. Or you could, if you have multiple periods of the same class, you can kind of do an entire class project where period 1 measures the CO2, then period 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you can actually look at how it changes around campus during, say, student drop-off and student pickup. Soil things you can use. You can look at the soil moisture at different locations. You can also take samples of soil and measure the pH and conductivity of them as well, and say, students might wonder, what is the difference between the pH of soil right next to a parking lot versus one that's a little farther on campus away from traffic and things like that. And to use these sensors, the thing that I recommend making sure is that if you have sensors, it's really hard for students to connect them to like a computer and then carry the computer around campus to do readings. I'm not saying that I didn't do that in the past, but if you have a LabQuest unit, those are super helpful for being able to be very mobile. The other nice thing is with the Go Direct sensors, they can connect directly to the student's own devices. So if the students are allowed to use their phones or iPads, they can use those to actually do the data collection themselves. Any questions so far? Kind of at a good talking break here.
No questions so far. We're looking good.
All right, fantastic. So let's talk about collecting data. So I'm going to throw in my graphical analysis here, which hopefully everybody can see. And we're going to do, I'm going to try connecting a light and color sensor here. That is not it is. And so with the light and color sensor, this is one I can show the example of. It has multiple sensor channels. So I'm going to turn on the light channel and the UV channel because I'm curious of my UV and my, it could be out in the parking lot. Granted, I'm here in the studio at work, so not so much UV inside. Now, in some cases, in most situations, when you connect the sensor, you're going to have kind of a set parameters set up for data collection. And you are able to change those if you come over here to data collection settings. We can change how often we're collecting data and for how long. And that can work, but a lot of times what I find when I'm doing kind of more field type work is I'm looking for distinct points of data. So what I personally like to do is actually look at my meters, my live meter screen here, and turn off my graphs. So that way students, because I was also a big proponent of having students have their own kind of lab journal that they kept data in. And this allows the students to then record data points and locations of where they're specifically collecting these data points at. So for luminance here, for example, I'm going to shine it right at my light here, right at the wall. I'm shining it right at the light that is shining on my face. And this gives me, okay, so I'm about 400 lux at that light. And then how much is it of that is reflecting off the wall behind me, which is very dark. And you can see not much is reflecting off. And then I can look at the surface of the table that's actually reflecting more off. And so students can walk around campus with the sensor and look at different surfaces. How much light is reflecting off a car? How much is reflecting off concrete, grass, things like that. And to me, I really like this one to be able to get students outside because it's a fairly simple point of data collection. And it's something that they can do year round. So you can do it in the summer, you can do it in the spring, you can do it in the winter and get different values. Then you can tie this in with a temperature probe and do the same thing where you take the light reading and the temperature reading for that location. The other thing is if you do want students to collect and graph defined points, what we can do is instead of doing a time-based data collection, we can do an event-based data collection where we're going to have specific events we collect data, and those events can go along with location. So I can change my event name to location. We're done. I can start data collection, and my location 1, I'm going to turn my meters back on so I can see them better right here. And I'm going to keep my data point at location 1. And then location 2, which is going to be on top of the desk. And then location 3, which is the wall behind me. And so I'm able to have these data points now mapped out. You can see UV intensity is 0 because there's no UV light in the studio, which is a good thing. But allows the students to graph that information live as well. And I would still have my students be writing this down in their lab notebook too, so that they had these data points individually besides just on the graph. All right, so I'm going to disconnect the light sensor and now connect a weather sensor. And again, the weather sensor is one of those that has a great number of different sensors available on it. We've got wind speed, wind, and some of these are calculated based on other channels. So wind speed, temperature, relative humidity, and station pressure are kind of our standard ones that are on the sensor itself. And the rest of them are going to be mostly calculations based on these different readings. Wind direction we actually get because there's a magnetic field sensor on here that we can actually determine which direction the wind's coming from. But everything else is actually calculated based on readings. So I'm going to click done. I'm going to do a new experiment. I'm probably going to have to, nope, remembers all my state channels. And again, with the meters, I really like having the meters here because it helps kind of clean that up. And especially with using something like a weather sensor, when you have so many different parameters you're collecting, the graphs can get really messy. And so it's kind of nice to be able just to have them separate and kind of watch how they change on this field here. So I can blow on my wind speed and kind of get an idea of what my wind speed's going, my temperature, and everything. Now I can go to my graph here and I can collect data, and this is set up what I like for about 60 seconds. So the students can collect data for that 60 seconds because, for example, with wind speed's not going to be a constant measurement. It's going to vary. And so over 60 seconds, they can do a reading of wind speed and then calculate what the average wind speed in that location is. And this is just a way of students being able to look at the different abiotic factors that can be affecting the environment around them, and then being able to actually kind of come up with things and study and look at different locations. So, on. Any questions? Still none?
Still none. We're looking good. And
All
and
right.
everyone, please feel free to put any chats into the webinar chat at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you don't want to put a question directly into the chat, you can always privately chat me, and I'd be happy to read that out for you. So lots of options there.
Awesome. So a lot of things I just talked about are kind of simple, basic abiotic factors around campus, looking temperature probes and things like that. We also have a case where, depending on the course you're teaching, you might want to cover some water quality testing, but you're not one of those lucky people who actually has a pond on campus or a wetland right by or a river running through. There are people that actually do, and I'm always jealous of them. So the way around this that I have found is there are some different information that different ways that you can kind of set up your own pond, basically. One of the ways you can do it that I've seen people do is where they'll get a kiddie pool and fill it with water and put some rocks in it and put it in different location to kind of see what might actually come to the water. And then over time, actually do water quality testing on it. One of the things that I do is I make my own water samples. So when I'm out doing conferences and do a water quality workshop, I can't exactly just go to a river or a pond and bring water in. It's really difficult. So I will take a bucket and add just all sorts of stuff to it. I'll add tea to basically change the pH of the water and to give it a stained color to it. I'll add sometimes Alka-Seltzer tablets to add some different chemicals in there and change the conductivity of the water sample itself. And it helps make the pH a little more buffered. If I have algae, I'll just throw some algae in there. If I don't have algae, I'll just throw spinach or other type of plant matter in there and kind of squish it all up. It's a matter of just kind of making whatever. The other thing that I often did, and I did this a lot with soil more than water, but is encourage students to bring their own samples in. If they have like a river they're curious about, or a pond or a wetland, or if there's teachers in your school that live by one, that they might want to bring in a sample. The only problem is that with bringing in samples and making your own water sample, there are two main parameters that are often measured that will be difficult to be accurate with. And that's going to be temperature, because usually you want to look at the temperature of the water itself at the source, and dissolved oxygen. Especially if the samples have been sitting around a while, the dissolved oxygen can gas off. And so you're not going to get exactly the most accurate measurement, but you can talk about that with your students and think of that as kind of a learning point for them. So I see we have a question. What to do with elementary students using iPads? Which graphical analysis app and wireless Bluetooth sensors? So the app that we use is called Graphical Analysis, and it's a free app you can download from the App Store, or if you have computers or Chromebooks from the appropriate location. For computers, you download it from our website. For Chromebooks, you go to the Chrome Web Store, I believe. There's two, so it gets confusing. It's not the Google Play Store, it's the Chrome Web Store. And you would then want to use the Go Direct sensors, which connect by Bluetooth. That's going to be your simplest and easiest way. It also allows you to not have that cost of having to purchase a lab quest. It makes it really, really simple. And I had a question about, how do you handle students being off task or misbehaving outside? That is a very difficult thing. One of the things that I found with students is usually they were so engaged actually just being outside that they actually minded and paid really well attention, because basically one of the things I say is, if you abuse this, we're not going to be able to do it anymore. And just the pure fact of getting to go outside was such a reward for them that it really helped them keep on task and keep them focused. Yeah, and then having very specific objectives for them to reach, like I think Joel just said this in chat, is that really helps them stay focused. So that's where it's going to be depending on the grade level of students that you have, and basically their maturity level of, do they need a focused task that they have to accomplish to keep them on point? Or are they students that are able to kind of go off on their own and still be able to accomplish what they need to do? All right. And so another point of kind of like, I like to talk with the scaffolding of this is, you can, if you have the ability to do it, make this something more than just a one-time event. Keep going. One of the goals that I had when I was teaching was to basically get off a program where I would have my students collect data year after year after year and basically get a bank of data from each of my classes to be able to analyze in future years and to see if there's changes and differences. So looking at things like what happens weekly, if you can go weekly, awesome. Monthly, that works too. Change it up and look at, like, sometimes this can take, maybe if you get your students down on it, 15 minutes of time, and that's it. And then you can kind of compare year to year and have students look back at this old data and question, what might be happening? Why are we seeing warmer temperatures later in the year? Or why is things not getting as cold as soon? And in some cases, what you can actually get is this amazing large compilation of data that really hits some of those points and helps students to learn basic analysis tools of looking at larger sets of data instead of just a few data points they might collect. The other thing that in the climate and meteorology book I wrote is there is some activities that it's really useful to have data from throughout the day, but it's not like you have your students all day long. So what you can do is have each class period gather a data point. For example, if you have a weather system moving in, you can collect a data point of barometer readings at first period, second period, third period, and kind of gather that data as a group and then look at it the next day and see what happened throughout the day with those data points. I don't have time to cover it here, but the other thing you can do is mapping the data. So something that I did, because I was bored one day, was I had all this information that I had collected of water quality data at different points. And so I actually created a Google map where I put in where the location was along with the different readings that I had taken at that location, so that I could then compare it to different locations throughout the state. So like, for example, we are lucky enough, we actually have a creek running behind our building here about a block away. So I walked down there, I got my dissolved oxygen reading, pH reading, conductivity, and temperature reading as well. And so you can compile this information and then actually have it kind of mapped out. Now, we don't, for GPS coordinates, most students' phones have a GPS in them now. So they can actually, when they are writing down their data, they can actually record what their GPS location is as well. Oh, Joel, that's a great, yeah. If you can convince administrators to get a permanent water pool or bird bath, that's a great idea. And one of the things that I would look into doing too is if you're going to do a bird bath or something that you might actually have wildlife on campus, it'd be a lot of fun to put a game camera on it to actually see what's visiting those locations as well. All right, so some of the end goals I think with getting students outside is one of the big things is kind of, there's a lot of hot words going around place-based learning. And just having students understand the place that they're in and the area that is around them and start wondering and appreciating these locations. I mean, even if you're in a completely urban campus, there's still nature around. It's still an environment. It's just more of a man-made environment. And it's still interesting to look at. One of the big things is getting students to start asking questions about what's around them. Why are things certain ways? Why are these trees growing better than these in this different location on campus? And kind of seeing that the world around them is open to lots of different investigations and that they can ask all sorts of different questions and have tools available for them to investigate them. And the end is just have fun. One of the big things with education that I found is like, if you're not having fun and the kids aren't having fun, it makes it really, really difficult. And so by introducing some of these ideas of just basic, go outside the door and see what's happening under that one tree on campus, or what happens in the parking lot versus the football field. Just doing that kind of gets them out of that mindset of just, oh, we're sitting in class for another 53 minutes today. So, Miss McDaniel's going to lecture at us and so on and so forth. It just gets them a different location. And it's just, yeah, having fun. Like, this is a lovely picture of me saying, walking through a forest going, I wonder what the temperature of this root is. And literally just having the temperature probe and measuring these things, because I do that where I walk around with sensors and just kind of wonder. And that's really it for today. It's kind of a short session today, but is there any other questions we might have? We just collected snow from around campus. Oh, that's a great idea. Yes, Joel. So in Logger Pro, we do have some sample data from water quality that we've collected around here that has the maps of the Vernier campus and some other locations that we did. Yeah, definitely ask questions. Baseline data is fantastic so we can look at different changes and things. Yes, definitely, Lisa. Oh, and Allie, that's an awesome idea, doing snow and using conductivity. That's really, really cool. I love that idea. Could do it too in the spring and measure the soil to see how that salt seeped into the soil and what it did to that potentially too. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you again. After this, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me at biology@vernier.com. There was a link shared that had a folder of resources. I'm going to make sure I have a PDF of this presentation put in there for you as well. And again, don't hesitate to reach out. One of the things I like doing is trying to get some new ideas and help teachers use equipment in different ways and get their students more exposed to the environment and getting outside. It's super, super important. So thank you all for joining. And I hope you have an amazing day and a well-deserved winter break coming up.
Thanks all. Bye now.